to the Bible Feed podcast, a place for conversations about the Bible and faith in the modern world, where ordinary people come together to help each other understand the Bible better. Let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of the Bible Feed podcast. I'm Dan Weatherall and I'm here with Paul Davenport again. Hi Paul.
Hi Dan, here we go with Revelation again.
Here we go again, that's right, yeah, we're in the thick of it. We've been looking at all the different visions, we've looked at the seals on the scroll as they've been broken by the Lamb, and we've looked at the trumpets as well, and all these vivid symbols. So just a sort of really quick summary, what we're finding, what we're discovering it's all about, if we can manage to do this, is it's this perspective, isn't it? There's a perspective issue where the churches, the followers of Jesus on the ground in difficulty, maybe some of them experiencing some kind of persecution, waiting for Jesus to come again, and they're having a view from earth. And yet here is a revealing of a view from heaven, God's perspective, effectively, and how, they're very different things. And we sort of looked at that, didn't we? We looked at some really interesting perspectives, how that, the scrolls were all about, wanting God's vengeance to come because of people suffering. And the expectation is, you think God's going to come and do this? Even the structure of those seals, 4 plus 2 and then a delay, that pointed towards that, didn't it?
Yeah, and building up to an expectation of divine intervention, but then that being delayed and something else being explained. I mean, in the seals, we saw it was to do with a delay so that there's more opportunity for people to come to Jesus from those that dwell on the earth. And then in the trumpets, it's a little bit different because they sound a little bit more like judgments. You remember they were like the plagues of Exodus. But I guess just like Pharaoh in the Exodus account didn't repent. He was always hardening his heart. These plagues in Revelation, in the trumpets, also don't have the effect of bringing people to repentance. And so there's this other second delay in a sequence of 7, which then explains that there's some witnessing to be done by the followers of Jesus, and that their witness looks a lot like the self-sacrifice of Jesus, his death and resurrection. It's described in those terms. And then that does bring people to give glory to God.
Yeah, so it was a real call to action, wasn't it? I think we talked about, which is fascinating. It really helps us. What's that verse? Revelation 1 verse 3, is it? Blessed are those who hear the word and do it. Keep it and do it. Is that right?
And keep it, yes.
Yeah. So there's something to do about
We've
this.
quoted it a few times now. We ought to know that one off by heart.
We ought to, yeah. Okay. So we're up to chapter 12 then. And we drew the book of Revelation in the second of episodes in this series, didn't we? Which was always good and good fun to do. And when we did that, we sort of had that diagram and we were thinking about it. You said that this was a very sort of different section, or it's starting something different. So why is that?
Yeah, and I think that was because when we get to the end of chapter 11, it describes God's temple in heaven being open, and it's this idea of a sanctuary. So you're left with this image of the temple being open.
Yep.
And then when we pick up in chapter 15 and verse 5, we get the same picture. After this I looked, and the sanctuary, it's the same word in the Greek, the sanctuary of the tent of witness in heaven was opened, and then something else is described. So you've got almost a return to, okay, that thing that I said at the end of chapter 11, we're back there again. So you could almost just miss out the bits in between and read through from the end of chapter 11, pick up in chapter 15, and you then go into another sequence of 7, and it's bowls being poured out, and it just flows very nicely from one straight into the other, which sort of indicates that this section in the middle, in between those 2 points, is a separate section, is doing something.
Yeah, it does, and we're not just going to completely miss it out, are we? We will think about it.
Yeah, this section, it's really fascinating.
Okay.
There's loads of stuff in there. Obviously, we can't cover everything that's in there. There's 7 signs. They're not, we've got sequences of 7, the seals and the trumpets. This section also has 7 things in it. So it starts with a woman that's about to give birth to a baby boy, and then there's a dragon, and then there's a beast that comes out of the sea that is very weird, and then there's another beast that comes out of the earth, and that's different but equally weird. It returns to the theme of the Lamb and the 144,000, and then there's 3 angels that proclaim some things, and then there's a harvest. So those are the 7 things.
Yeah, and it's full of fantastic beasts, isn't it? That's the that's the thing we're looking at.
Yeah, that's what we're going to home in on. Those 3: the dragon, the beast that comes out of the sea, and the beast that comes out of the earth.
Fantastic beasts and where to find them, if we're allowed to say that. Okay, so let's just think about the dragon then. First of all, we should do this in 3 sort of manageable chunks. That should be hopefully straightforward, and we'll just try and remember, be focused on what we're doing. We're trying to get a sense of what the original hearers of this letter would have taken from this. That's the premise, isn't it, right from the start? So, okay, so the dragon in chapter 12, it's verse 7, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated. And there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ has come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. Right, what's all that about, Paul?
There's quite a bit going on there, but you can see there's a conflict. There's a war in heaven between various combatants, including this dragon, and that's the one that we want to just focus on. Mm-hmm. We saw it described there in verse 9. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. So what is this? What is this ancient serpent? I think immediately that concept takes us back to Genesis chapter 3. I think to the Garden of Eden, to the serpent that we're introduced to there. It says to Eve and Adam, "You will not surely die." God has given this instruction, and the serpent flatly contradicts what God has said. So it deceives. So that's the starting point, the jumping off point, if you like, in the Old Testament for this concept of a serpent. One who deceives. It's maybe worth just picking up a couple of other references to the serpent idea. There's a couple of verses in the Psalms which are helpful, in Psalm 140.
Okay.
So I'll maybe just read those. So Psalm 140, "Deliver me, O Lord, from evil men. Preserve me from violent men, who plan evil things in their heart and stir up wars continually. They make their tongue sharp as a serpent's, and under their lips is the venom of asps." So people that are behaving in that way, they're deceiving, they're stirring up conflict, violence. Those kind of things are associated with the serpent. In that case, it says it comes from their heart.
Yeah, so the serpent then from Genesis becomes this symbol. Is that right? Almost this sort of metaphor and symbol for people who exhibit that characteristic.
Yeah, and it tends to be in opposition to God.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, it reminds me as well of when Jesus in John has a lot of arguments with the religious rulers.
Yeah.
Throughout the Gospel of John, it's the Jews, isn't it? And it's referring to the leaders. And in John 8, where Jesus says, "You are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and has nothing to do with the truth, because there is no truth in him. He is lying." And it goes on to talk about him lying. He's the father of lies, that's right. So that symbol, that metaphor carries on, doesn't it? He's there talking about the opposition to him, which is a bit like what's been described in symbol.
The idea that Jesus is putting across there is that these people are showing serpent-like characteristics. So he's saying, "You're of your father, the devil. From the beginning he was a liar," like that serpent in the Garden of Eden. So it's about the characteristics. It's a symbol for those very human, those characteristics that come from the human heart, from human beings. And actually, there's a cross-reference in my Bible from verse 44 to one of John's epistles, in 1 John 3 and verse 8. Kind of reinforces that point. "Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. That the reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil." So in that Revelation 12, we're seeing this conflict and this ancient serpent, the devil, Satan, in this dragon representation, being thrown down. So, okay, the Son of God appeared in order to do that.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful actually, because there's probably all sorts of different views and interpretations on this passage, but there's probably quite often, isn't it, that it's interpreted as if it's describing something that happened a very long time ago when an angel fell and rebelled and was thrown out of heaven, or it's sort of drawing on that idea or used to support that kind of idea, isn't sometimes, which really, we're talking in symbol, aren't we, first of all, which we've talked about all the way through, and in the context of what you've just explained, that's really helpful to see this as the conflict that Jesus experienced and the victory that Jesus won. In fact, that's exactly what Revelation 12 says, doesn't it? They have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. So yes, the conquering and the victory is what Jesus has achieved. So it's like in Hebrews as well, isn't it, where it talks about in one of the early chapters in Hebrews about Jesus, who took part of the same nature as human beings so that he could destroy the devil, the one that has the power of death.
Yeah, exactly right. So in Hebrews, Jesus is described as a human being with all that goes with that, so that through his death he might destroy the one that has the power of death, that is, devil. And there's sort of a parallel description in Romans chapter 8 of that same thing, the effectiveness of what Jesus did through his death. But this time it's, for God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin he condemned sin in the flesh. So sin, the devil, it's a parallel passage describing the same thing, what Jesus achieved in his death. In one, it's sin is overcome, and the other, it's the devil. So they're kind of illustrating that they're the same thing, a representation of sin. And in that passage in Revelation 12, it's the followers of Jesus that are that have also conquered by the blood of the Lamb, because they loved not their lives unto the death. So they've associated themselves with Jesus. We saw that with those witnesses, the two witnesses. They followed a pattern that was like Jesus. They died and they were raised again. They followed Jesus in that image, in that self-sacrifice.
No, that's really, really powerful. So they're participating in what Jesus has done, aren't they?
Yeah.
So that it wasn't a case that what Jesus did was some kind of transaction that happened and brilliant, we're now sort of free from the devil or whatever. No, there's actually, it's an example. It's for him. He did this so that we follow him, we participate in those things. That's the idea, isn't it? And it shows, I think, really well that what the devil, what the dragon, what the serpent is, and it's this sin, isn't it? It's all different representations and pictures and images of this real struggle that human beings have with ourselves and our selfish desires, and to sort of use that imagery of the dragon and refer to him as the ancient serpent, refer to all those things. I think the first hearers would have heard all of that, wouldn't they? I
don't think their minds would have jumped to literal dragons or angels in heaven and falling in flames to the earth. I think it would have been taking them to Genesis, the Garden of Eden, the source of sin. And actually, in Genesis chapter 4, there's the description of Cain and Abel, and Cain murders his brother in the beginning. We kind of seen Jesus refer to it. In the beginning, he was a murderer. And in Genesis chapter 4, Genesis 4 verse 7, he's told, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. So there's a contest of rulership. Who is going to rule in the heart and mind of Cain? Is he going to let sin, anger, deceit, conflict, violence rule, or is he going to let the peace of God rule in his heart? And that's an epitome, if you like, of that conflict. It is a spiritual conflict in a very real sense. And I think that might be why it's portrayed in Revelation 12 as a conflict that's in heaven. So it's who is going to rule in the hearts and minds of men.
Right. Okay. So that's the dragon. Okay. Let's move on to the next one then, which is there's a beast that comes from the sea. So the dragon is pretty fantastic or pretty ominous. But now we've got a beast that's rising up from the sea, which is a little bit more, is really something else, isn't it? So shall I read a few verses from chapter 13?
It's worth, just before you read the beginning of chapter 13,
okay,
just look at how chapter 12 finishes, and he, the dragon, stood on the sand of the sea, and then this thing emerges from the sea. So there is a connection between the dragon and what is about to appear in this nightmare vision for John out of the sea.
Right, okay. So this is what John sees, okay? And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marvelled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?"
So, where can we start with that? So, it's not really a real creature, is it? It's a real
No.
hybrid of a thing, a chimera.
A mishmash of something, yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's a leopard. There's a leopard in there. There's a bear and a lion. And I think to the hearers of this, they would probably be thinking Daniel.
Yeah, because there's beasts that rise out of the sea in Daniel chapter 7, aren't there?
So Daniel's beasts, it's a lion and then a leopard. No, let me get it in the right order. It's a lion, and then a bear, and then a leopard, and then a fourth beast that is sort of indescribable. And this sounds pretty indescribable. So it's this fourth beast from Daniel 7. So I think it's quite likely that first hearers would have readily identified this with the Roman power, with the Roman emperor. It gets its power from the dragon. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the dragon. It's this kind of human natural influence that seeks to deceive, conflict, subdue others, have dominion, and so on. So whatever this is, it's a human construct. It's powered by human nature, if you like, human sin.
Yeah, which they probably would have readily have seen in the humans in the Roman system.
Yeah,
the sort of abuse of power and everything. It's got so much strange characteristics, hasn't it? Can we sort of explore that? I mean, it's got things like it has a mortal wound, or it seemed to have a mortal wound in one of its heads, but then it was healed. So what's going on there?
Yeah, and this is really interesting because that's a set of characteristics. It appears to be mortally wounded but healed, alive again, and then is worshipped. And we've seen that before because that's precisely what is said about the Lamb in chapter 5.
Yeah.
So if we go and look in chapter 5, between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain. But he's there, he's alive. This lamb is alive. And then he's given authority to open the scroll, and then he's praised. And everything that is in heaven and on earth and under the earth praises and falls down and worships and gives praise to the Lamb and the one on the throne that gave him that authority. And so what we've got here in chapter 13 is all those that dwell on the earth worshipped the dragon that gave him his authority and this beast, and say, who is like the beast, who can fight against it? So that's what we're seeing, a deliberate paralleling with the Lamb.
Yeah, it's almost like there's an upstart. There's someone deliberately, or something that's deliberately in opposition to God, or there's a deliberate parallel to something that's rivaling God and rivaling Jesus effectively, and the lordship of Jesus. Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, I think so. But in this beast from the sea, it's a grotesque caricature of the true thing, which is the Lamb that was slain and that is worthy to open the scroll and so on. And so we've seen 2 creatures now. Mm-hmm. The first, the dragon, this influence of, human nature and sin, and who is going to rule? Is it God or is it sin in human heart? So it's kind of parallel to God. God gives his authority to the Lamb to open the scroll and so on, and the Lamb is praised. But then sin gives its authority to this other thing, this grotesque representation of something else that is, for the immediate hearers, it's the Roman Empire, it's the Roman emperor. And actually, when you dig a little into the historical background, that fits really well because, if you go back to the beginning of the Caesars, to Julius Caesar, when he died, his adopted son, Octavian, who then became Augustus Caesar, deified his father, Julius. So Augustus became the Son of God. So he's taking on titles which are directly mirroring Jesus as the Son of God, the true Son of God. And so then you get the cult of worship of the emperors. Initially, it starts out as the worship of the father of the emperor, who's now dead, and when they die, they get deified. But the time of the writing of the book of Revelation is probably in the time of the Emperor Domitian, and he had a son who died very young, and he called his son that had died the Son of God, and then kind of put two and two together and thought, well, if he's the Son of God, I'm God. So he sort of deified himself while he was still alive, whereas all the other emperors at least had the decency to die first and let other people deify them. But Domitian deifies himself. So that cult of worship of the emperor as a god is reaching its kind of peak and fruition at the time of this book being written. We'd said we wouldn't do too much history with with looking at this, but perhaps just one more thing. It's described, one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but it was alive. And it was the case that, Emperor Nero, there was a sequence of emperors to Emperor Nero, and Nero committed suicide. And then there was a year in which there were 4 emperors. Mm-hmm. So it looked like the position of Roman emperor was just falling apart and collapsing. But then along comes the Flavian dynasty, with Vespasian first of all, and it recovers, and it's a little bit like this head that was wounded, but is healed. It's so much so that there were rumours about Nero returning.
Okay.
He just disappeared. He didn't commit suicide. He disappeared. He went off somewhere and then came back.
I see.
Kind of 10 years later. And there were rumours and legends about that. So the challenge to the first century hearers of this is, which is the real power? Is it God and his son Jesus represented in the Lamb, or is it sin and its grotesque manifestation in the Roman emperor?
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and it's fascinating to see this imagery. They're almost like political cartoons, aren't they? That kind of thing, this sort of grotesque exaggeration of things that happened, and drawing on things that people would have known about, like the rumours of Nero and things like that. So people would have readily understood it, and yet the powerful message is setting up this choice, isn't it? Is that right? Setting up a choice to the Christians, effectively. Are they going to continue to pledge their allegiance to Jesus as Lord, or are they going to give in?
Yeah, it's painting those powers that are setting themselves up to be worshipped in their true colours.
Yes.
Kind of showing them, describing them for being as grotesque as they are.
Yeah, you are of your father the devil. That's good. Okay, right. So that's the second beast of the sea, but there's another one, isn't there? So let's look at the third one. That's later on in chapter 13, and it's the beast that rises out of the earth. So I'll just read that. So that's chapter 13, verse 11. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. So another strange thing.
Equally weird. But we can, again, just look at some of the characteristics that are given for it. So it has 2 horns. Mm-hmm. It performs these great signs, making fire come down from heaven, and by doing these signs, it's deceiving people. And its purpose, its role, its aim is to get people to worship the first beast that came out of the sea, which we have associated with the Roman emperor. So if you think about that, so 2 horns, able to perform signs like bringing fire from heaven and persuading people to worship something else, where have we seen that before?
Haven't we seen that in interlude, was it chapter 11, with the witnesses, 2 witnesses?
So we have 2 witnesses there that, chapter 11, verse 5, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes, and they have power to shut the sky and do all sorts of things, and perform signs. And as we saw when we looked at that, the purpose of their witnessing was to bring the remnant of the people to give glory to God.
Yeah, it's really similar, isn't it? So the beast from the sea has lots of parallels with the lamb and the authority given to it and so on. And yet it's this grotesque caricature. It's, you know, it's wrong. It's not the reality. And here there's something else going on, another grotesque caricature of the true 2 witnesses, and they're trying to get them to worship this beast rather than worship God. So there's this perpetuating that conflict.
Yes, yeah. So I suppose the question is, what is it in the Roman world that is persuading people, seeking to persuade people to worship the first beast or the emperor? What is it? And I guess similar to, you've got the followers of Jesus persuading people to come to Jesus and worship Jesus, and you've got followers of the emperor, the administrative machinery throughout the empire that is out there forcing people to worship the emperor, which is, you know, when the imperial cult is in full swing throughout the empire. You know, it is expected in every major city, those cities that letters were written to, Ephesus and Thyatira and Laodicea and so on, in those cities people were expected to attend festivals and offer sacrifices to the emperor. And the imperial machinery and administration in all those cities of the empire forced people to do that. And, you know, there are some examples of early Christians who refused to do that. And there are accounts of... there's a lady called Vibia Perpetua who actually had a small child as well, and she refused to worship and offer sacrifice to the emperor, and she was killed. And Polycarp, who's an early church father, also was arrested and then thrown to the lions because he would not sacrifice to the emperor. So it's a very real scenario for the first hearers of this letter.
And even if for most Christians they didn't actually suffer to the death, they didn't actually go to literal martyrdom, the kind of economic and social outcast, they could become economic and social outcasts, couldn't they, effectively, by not engaging with society the way society wanted them to engage with. So yes, this just brings to light some pretty horrendous situations for them. So there's 3 beasts. Okay, fantastic beasts. Yep. We're building up a picture. We've been able to follow a bit of a thread. But what's the overall point?
From what we've looked at, there's an immediately relevant message, which is, in the context of these first hearers, they're in a world in which the emperor has set himself up as a god or as son of God, and given himself that status and title, and has a machinery of administration through his empire in which he can force people to worship him. And the message to the first hearers of this letter is, don't do that. Don't worship it. Don't worship the emperor, because it's not what is true. It's not where the true power lies. It's a distorted, grotesque caricature of where the true power is, which is in the true God and his son, the Lamb that has died to free people from sin. And so recognize it for what it is and don't worship it because it's not what is true. So there's that immediately relevant point. And it's really quite subversive of you know, when this is put out and circulated in those cities, the message is, do not have anything to do with the worship of the emperor. And that's, it's subversive. But there's a general relevance, I think, because throughout history, in different places, different circumstances, you know, the influence of human nature and its natural inclination to dominate and abuse and oppress sets up power structures, and they could be religious power structures, they could be political, and they demand allegiance from people. And they set up oppressive regimes that seek to force people to conform and give their allegiance to them. And, you know, that's a repeating pattern throughout history. And so the message of this has that general relevance through history as well to any Christian down the age.
Yeah, it's almost, you know, human beings have the potential within them to be pretty horrendous. But when they come together and in an organised way sort of perpetuate that in a sort of structure and a power structure, it becomes almost 10 times worse, doesn't it? It's caricatured. It's worse than even the sum of its parts. I wonder if that's why it's this this grotesque, non-human-like beast, or it's the dragon, or it's the devil, it's the serpent, that's representing something that's even worse than, what humans ought to be capable of. But we've got to look at it positively. There's a choice in front of us, effectively, that this is what it's trying to say, isn't it? There's Jesus, and there's his way of conquering and overcoming the serpent, sin, and it's him by giving himself, and that's the call for people who follow him to participate in that, to let his sort of dying sacrifice become their mode of life. Effectively, that's what it's calling them to do. So there's a way out. There's a way out of this cycle and this system of animal-like, beast-like qualities. So yeah, and I guess that's a way of us being able to start seeing things for what they are, seeing the structures of humanity for what they are, that they're fake, and seeing what really is true. It's the view from heaven versus the view from earth.
Yeah.
So yeah, very, very powerful and subversive for the time. But there's a little bit towards the end of chapter 13 which we need to talk about before we finish, which is the mark. That we've spent 5 episodes in Revelation, and this is the thing that everyone's talking about, or seem to have always been talking about.
Yeah.
What is the mark of the beast? When's it coming? And how do I know how do I know how to avoid it?
Yeah.
So what's going on there? There's this thing about putting a mark on the right hand or the forehead so that you can't buy or sell if you've got that mark. We've built up a lot of context now. So are we in a position to sort of try and work out what that is?
We've seen already that in the dragon, these 2 beasts, that they're being linked with their sort of opposites, whether that's God or Jesus or the followers of Jesus being those witnesses. So it wouldn't be surprising to us to find that the mark of the beast has a parallel in that, in something that we've seen already. And I think it does. And we saw in chapter 7 that the 144,000 were sealed in their forehead. A sealing, a mark was put on them that marked them out as belonging to Jesus.
Okay, yeah.
So it's a mark of ownership, of allegiance. And I think that's all it is. It's nothing literal, nothing specific in that sense. It's simply making the point that, as you say, there's a choice in front of people to place their allegiance with where the true power lies, with God and Jesus, or with these counterfeit caricatures. So I think it is as simple as that. There's also a very real, relevant kind of historical to the people who heard this the first time. If you did not give your allegiance to the emperor, you didn't sacrifice to the emperor, then you couldn't belong to some of the trade guilds.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't operate economically in the way that you could if you just capitulated and worshipped the emperor.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, yeah. So you can't buy or sell. Yeah, this is an economic hardship for people who choose not to place their allegiance to this sort of system and this sort of human construct. So yeah, what's the 666 thing though at the end? So this calls for wisdom, as the last verse of chapter 13. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
Well, there's a code, if ever there was one. And we said Revelation wasn't about cracking codes, but here is one. Yeah,
here is one, and it tells us this is one, doesn't it? This calls for wisdom, and you've got to try and calculate this. So yeah, the rest of it is something different, but here is a code.
And it does genuinely seem to be a code number that represents a name or a thing, and that was a common practice. So it is called gematria, where the letters of the Greek alphabet have numbers associated with them, and you add up the numbers, you add up the value of the letters, and you get to a number. So there's some graffiti that's been found in Pompeii, for example, which says, "I love her whose number is 545." So someone is declaring their love for someone whose name, presumably the letters of their name, add up to 545. So it was a real thing. That was found in Pompeii in 79 AD, or that's when it was inscribed. All sorts of ideas about how to apply that to 666. Irenaeus, who was in the 2nd century, applies it to the word Latinos, or the Latin man or Latin speaking man, which adds up to 666, and that associating it with Rome. Neron Caesar is the Caesar Nero. Transpose that into Hebrew letters, and they add up to 666. So whichever of those it may be, and there are others that other people have suggested, they're all pointing to Rome, essentially.
Okay.
So rather than saying it's the Roman emperor I'm talking about, because it's quite a subversive message, that might not be well received in the Roman Empire. So it's in a coded way saying this is the Roman emperor we're talking about.
Right, okay, yeah. And that fits exactly with what we've seen. So the context we've looked at has really been really helpful to understand that, and it just perpetuates that idea or solidifies the idea that there's this choice before the Christians who they're going to place their allegiance in. So it's not a barcode. And it's not something for us to look out to. Whenever we see the numbers 666 together, that's not something sinister or anything like that. It's something that's more sort of about our moral choice, isn't it? And our who we choose to trust. Is it going to be the systems of humanity that perpetuate violence and sin?
Of all the things in that chapter, it's just one extra little piece of data that confirms the overall message.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much for that. So, just to finally trying to wrap this up, the whole thing we've been looking at is almost a call to not do something, isn't it? But what should they have done? What's the call for the Christians? How should they sort of resist? What do they need to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we've used the word subversive a couple of times, and and that might be associated with an underground movement or a revolution of some sort, but it doesn't have those messages attached to it. It's not a call for violent resistance to the Roman system. It is a call to, if you recognize where the true power lies in the one true God and his son Jesus, and the example of self-sacrifice of Jesus, then it's a call to follow that example. The example of Jesus, the care for people that was involved in that. It's designed, I think, to give Christians comfort that, even if you're in the unfortunate situation where you can't benefit from the things that the system promises if you worship it, if you follow its values, that doesn't matter, because that isn't where the true power lies. It is ultimately with God. A little bit like Jesus in the situation where he was before Pilate. Jesus answering Pilate says, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above. Therefore he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." That's where the true power lies, and that's really the overwhelming message of this section.
And that's helpful for Christians who have also just heard that according to God's timescale and the view from heaven, things might go on for longer than they might expect and anticipate. Here is a call for them to endure and to trust and to maintain allegiance to Jesus throughout that time, because they're sort of part of God's way of bringing people to God. Right, so that's fascinating stuff. Lots of strange and wonderful things from the book of Revelation again. Thank you, Paul, for helping us get some kind of sense of some of it at a high level. We were never, ever going to delve into the detail of this book, but sometimes that's really helpful just to get a sense of overview of what the purpose and mission of the book is. So we're sort of marching well towards the close of this series. So I think we've got one more to do, haven't we?
Yep.
So hopefully you'll come back for that. Thank you everyone for listening. As always, let us know what you think. Please do follow us and like us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Twitter as well now. So Bible Feed Online. So you can find us there, getting up to no good at all in the Twitter sphere. So if you're on Twitter, check us out, find us, follow us, whatever the Twitter lingo is. And of course, BibleFeed.org. By all means, get in touch. It's really good to hear from people when you've been listening to the podcast. So thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.
You've been listening to the Bible Feed podcast. Thanks for joining us. We're always keen to hear what you think, hear your questions or subjects you'd like to discuss. So get in touch with us on our Facebook page or send a message from our webpage at biblefeed.org and be part of the journey.